podcast. This is episode number 212.
Yo, 212.
That's right. Area code? Is that it? That must be an area
New
code.
York.
Oh.
Yeah, New York City, 212.
Good. Look at that.
Some,
Mix, is that true?
I believe it is, yeah.
that's some New
Wasn't
York
my
City
area code,
trivia there that I gave you. You're welcome.
Wow, it's already been time well spent.
It has been.
Well, thanks for listening to the extra podcast. Joining me around the table today, Jeff,
Hi.
Andy,
Greg?
Yup.
Kyle,
Hello.
and for the last time,
Whoa.
ladies and gentlemen in the podcast land,
Jeremy the intern.
Jeremy the intern is no longer going to be with us.
Jeremy, would you like to reflect upon your year with us here at Northview?
Sure. Yeah. It's
Okay, that's good. Thank
There
you.
it was. That was quite helpful.
How would you like to reflect?
I would say it's been a great year. A great way for someone coming out of Bible college to establish a foundation for how to do ministry, and basically learn that by doing it and getting to apply it in a lot of different ways, and going deeper at the same time in theological studies. But no, it's been really good, and I'm very grateful for my time here.
Good. Well, it's been good having you. Thanks for pushing all the buttons over there.
You bet.
Making sure that this podcast goes out into podcast land with great alacrity. That's the word of the day.
Well done.
alacrity.
In fact, it's actually...
Alacrity. Alacrity.
Can you define it?
I can. Speed. With speed. Quickness. Without much hesitation.
Why didn't you just say with much speed?
Because it doesn't sound as cool.
That's right. All the kids are saying
At our congregational meeting, I used the word paradigmatic this year. I was very proud of myself for that.
Do you have like one of those things on your desk, like new word of the day?
No. I just have Kyle I read.
It's an interesting idea. Speaking of
Reading?
that, actually, that has nothing to do with what I
Did
need
you
to go
use the
to
word
next.
alacrity or paradigmatic in your book thinking?
No. Nor would I.
That's why it sold like dozens of
Exactly.
copies.
That's why people read it. If you don't want people to read your book, you just use
don't
words
put
like
the-
predilection.
Totally.
So, at any rate, moving. I have to confront Jeff on an
Wow.
issue before we get started.
Yeah, okay.
This is a fairly big issue.
Airing agreements.
Well, as many of you know, we the young adults had a Wake Festivus recently, and beer was there.
Oh.
Bruce beer. What do you got?
Oh. That's how you
Come
did
on,
there.
guys. I
You
mean,
see
what-
that right there?
What kind of young adults retreat do you think this is? Yeah.
You just had everyone waiting to hear.
Right. So Bruce Beer was there, and he's one of our elders for a long time.
He's
no
a
longer.
former elder of our church. He has now been moved to Kelowna.
Yeah, exactly. He's a great guy, and in fact, as I've often said, it's not Wake Festivus without beer. And however, when I was on Bruce's boat, he told me that he listens faithfully to the podcast. So first off, this is a shout out to Bruce. Glad that you listen. But then he also noted that often I eat banana bread at the podcast, and so he was feeling sorry for you guys. So he told me that he sent Jeff a loaf of banana bread
Yeah, well,
that never made it to this podcast, and
I wasn't.
suspicions are you've eaten it.
I was not told that it made it. It was for the podcast. I actually brought it to Northview, to the elders of Northview, and they ate it. If you'd like to take it up with them, Andy, you're free to.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a little, I would.
You're a little miffed?
I'm a little miffed.
You should write a letter.
Well, I'm airing my grievance right here. No, actually, it was actually Bruce that said you should probably confront Jeff on why he ate the banana bread and didn't bring it to
I
the
did not
podcast.
eat a single piece of the banana bread. However, I will say, little shout out, Bruce's company, Norma's Bakery, makes a mean banana bread.
True story.
They do. It is
And
an
I'd
excellent
love
banana
for
bread. You buy it at
another
little 7-Eleven stores and stuff. I think they're in 7-Eleven. If they're not, then Bruce, I'm sure, will text me and tell me otherwise. But anyway.
So if you're going to send something to us, don't send it to Jeff. Send it maybe to Greg or Kyle or me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
This is a good word. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, guys.
Hey, we have some really great questions here we're going to look at. The first question, this listener said, I love listening to your podcast every week as well as the bonus podcast. I do have a question. Why don't you ever have women on the extra podcast?
Well, we don't like them.
See, that was their question.
We think they're dangerous.
So
we live in a world of estrogen, and we're trying to avoid.
Have we
all of
never
it.
had?
No, we have
a girl?
actually had women on the podcast. I don't even know why. It's probably because a lot of the pastors are men at our church, and they're the ones who started this one. And quite honestly, the presence of the bonus podcast probably has limited our
before the bonus podcast
decision to we haven't tried to go out of our way to do that, and there's only a group of people who have been part of it, the podcast, even from the beginning.
Before the bonus podcast started, Crystal and Thalia made frequent appearances on the extra podcast.
They did.
Not every time. Part of it too is just scheduling. Like sometimes we send a pastor's meeting before the extra podcast, and people like Ezra aren't around the table, and so we ask, "Hey, is anyone available to come?" And Thalia's got an appointment. Crystal has an appointment. So
there are other pastors.
Scheduling.
There are other pastors who don't make appearance much on the podcast here. So Dave Heidebrecht and Dan Sparrow and Ron Friesen, and there's others who don't make it. It's not actually a deliberate attempt to eliminate the women from the podcast. It would require a deliberate attempt for us to include more. Perhaps that's what we should do. But we tend to feel that Kyle's presence here is estrogen enough.
Makes up for the lack of ladies.
I like to bring out the softer side of issues.
You do.
So there you go. Maybe over summer we'll try to get Crystal and Thalia in here a little bit more over the summertime.
Love to have them. It's great.
There's no. I guess the listener kind of was asking the question: is there anything prohibiting them from participating in the extra podcast?
No.
Okay.
No.
So there's no.
No, I don't think so.
It's mostly pragmatics.
It's mostly just pragmatics. Yeah, unintentional pragmatics even.
There you go.
Yeah. We don't do a lot. We probably should tell you, as you probably are aware, that we don't do a lot of planning around the podcast. Which can be a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing is sometimes we say things that we think, oh, I shouldn't have said that later. And sometimes...
Like what you just said to Kyle?
No, because, yeah, kind of. Anyway, but on the flip side, it is actually a really honest representation of how we mess around with each other and stuff. And some people don't like that. Other people do. It's okay. It's okay. So I apologize if, we're not really deliberate. Perhaps we should be more deliberate, but honestly, it's not the thing that we spend all our time thinking about. We're currently meeting in a room that has no air conditioning or anything on a hot day, and honestly, it's stifling how hot it is right now. Like this is the podcast room now, and I think we made an oversight regarding actually ventilation in the room. I don't think there is any.
Well, see, I think the problem is that if we throw the
don't put the AC on. Okay, that's fine.
It's going to make a noise.
Yeah, Greg's an expert with the thing up here.
Hey, last week we talked about inconsistency with flag usage. Remember that conversation?
I do.
We invited some feedback from people.
All right.
So we had one person send in a response. So I'm going to read it, and you guys can engage with this person's.
Can we get a recap? I wasn't a part of that podcast. Just a quick 30 seconds.
So, Jeff, give a quick recap.
We were saying, so it was interesting at the same time that the Abbotsford City Council had decided to fly the rainbow flag in honor of gay rights. They had decided to do that above City Hall here in Abbotsford on the same week that there was a big hubbub down in the U.S. about the Confederate flag. And so we were saying that both of them represent special interest groups. The difference, as far as I can see, is that one of those special interest groups is seen as being wicked by the society at large, and the other special interest, or at least supporting wicked things. So the Confederate flag stands for racism and wicked things, which we all agree with, that those are wicked. But the society as a whole does not think that the gay rights issue is wicked, or that homosexual sex is wicked, and therefore flying the flag is a little different. It was a broad brush, so I'm not in any way troubled by somebody who would want to come in and nuance that. My hope is, I haven't read the email, my hope is that would be charitable, because it was just an idea that we were talking about in response to that kind of thing. So I'm happy to hear nuancing.
So the conversation was circling around the apparent inconsistency between the decision-making process.
Right, and that basically the society at large goes. We are hypocritical often in the way that we treat issues, and it seems to me that if you establish that homosexual activity is sin, homosexual sex is sin, so is racism, and you're going to have to establish that one is worse than the other. I think that's why somebody would say, would want to say, well, even if they're both sin, I think that racism's worse. Therefore, you shouldn't fly the Confederate flag, but you should fly the. Or they would want to establish that maybe the rainbow flag stands for more than just homosexual sex. So that's an interesting discussion. But anyway, where you go?
So here's the email that was sent in. My observation is that there is no inconsistency in the flag issue. The stance taken by the authorities is consistent because underneath these decisions is the worship of our cultural idol, which is individual freedom. So if you look at Western history, we see the development of individual freedoms that liberal society views as progress. We got rid of the authority of the Pope in the Reformation and the authority of kings in the American and French revolutions. We achieved racial freedom in the 1860s with the American Civil War and the 1960s with the Civil Rights Movement. Feminism made great gains, and sexual freedom was also achieved in the 1960s. Gay lesbian freedoms are moving along nicely in the last decade. The next step in the inevitable march forward, in quotes they wrote, toward completely unfettered individual autonomy is freedom from our biology. Gender or race, as Caitlyn Jenner and Rachel Dolezal illustrate perfectly. The public reaction to the latter, Rachel Dolezal, is more controversial, but this is just because it takes a little while for the dust to settle. We'll realize at some point that we live in a post-racial world and all will be well. It's all very logical when you remove the authority of God and all earthly authority, even that of objective reality, from the equation. Everything becomes subjective. So he's finished by saying, Christians do not object to many of these freedoms because freedom's a good thing. The problem is that, like any good thing, it cannot take the place of God. It will eventually become a very cruel and demanding God. And I wonder how long we can go down this road before we realize that the emperor has no clothes.
All right. No, I agree in large part, but okay, so let me interact a little bit, though, with the idea that the civil rights movement was an expression, as I understand him, that the civil rights movement was an expression of our non-belief in God. I
think the main issue was the individual freedom.
Right, but he's saying that's the broad brush throughout history that explains all of these movements, including the civil rights movement. I'm not sure I'm willing to go there with the civil rights movement. Yeah, perhaps there certainly are some elements, but I think that saying that the civil rights movement and the modern turn in the gay rights movement are equated, to me, is too broad a stroke.
Your concern is that the civil rights movement had a theological grounding
Right.
to many of the proponents of it, which
Right.
was in Scripture and rooted in positive, good exegesis.
Right, and I think that actually, in some cases, it was not, hey, give me my individual rights. Yeah.
But I think that's a really thought through and well written kind of reflection on there is a common thread of individualism.
Without a doubt.
That connects all these different things.
Well, I think that
And
we would agree.
Where does that thread lead? Well, that's going to be interesting.
We would agree that, and I think that overall the point being made is that self-actualization is the goal of Western culture today, which is hyper-individualism. I just want to know me, and I want to express me in whatever way I want to express me, no matter what that means. And if I'm a white guy and I feel black, I should be able to be black. I should be able to be Asian. If I'm Asian and I want to be white, I should be whatever. Yeah, and so post-racial is a word that I'm sure in time will come to bear. Certainly post-gender will be the case. So yes, I'm very happy with that thread. I don't know if I don't know if the meaning. Yeah, I'll leave it there. It's always awkward when someone starts a sentence off and they stop, isn't it?
I was thinking that,
Yeah.
but I'm okay with it.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's a good thought. Do you guys think that there's a consistency on the flag issue? We've moved away from the issue in particular to the generalities of what's culture at large look like and how is it moving, to the specifics of these two flags being flown at the same time. He's saying, as I understand it, that no, these two flags being flown are consistent because everyone is just out for their own individualism.
Yeah, your own individualism, as long as it doesn't explicitly confront another person's individualism.
Okay, so but that's I think that's my question, though, is that that would make sense if the society at large was saying to the white racist supremacist who loves the Confederate flag, hey, you go and fly your flag, man, because that's the way you feel, and we're gonna fly this one up here, the gay rights flag, because that's how we feel.
Right. So the limit is, if you're infringing or imposing.
But that's my point, though. These things, though, are it's the opposite that's happening. The one is being considered to be horrible and wicked. How awful is it we fly the Confederate flag? Do you see what I'm saying? So we are suppressing the individual expression of a white supremacist.
Their freedom.
And their freedom. But we are embracing the freedom of those who have abandoned traditional sexual mores. So I think that's kind of where my point is, I think, and it's not odd to me in the sense that I expect it to be the case. I just think it's hypocritical.
I also think it's interesting that the activity of flag bearing, it is by its very nature a celebratory thing. Like it's not a subtle private thing. It's a celebration. Like the reason we fly a Canadian flag is to show we're proud to be Canadian. It's the reason why when you drive through the States you can see people with American flags on their lawns. It's
want a good
intentional
summer
move.
If you're driving through the States, as an aside, if you're driving through the States this summer and you're having a family holiday, great game to play with your kids is the flag game, where you compete against each other on how many American flags you can find. Right? Honestly, my family and I, on a 5-hour trip into the States, we found, I think, 400.
Like
a lot of that was from farmland.
Personal homeowners?
No,
or
500
just like
flags.
Anywhere that you saw flags.
Anytime you saw a flag, yeah.
Not just a logo of it, but an actual flag.
Yep, flag.
That's impressive.
Yeah. I dominated that game. Anyway.
Were you driving?
Yeah, and I still won.
Take that, Sophie. Can I move the conversation a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
Similar but different direction. Sure. We'd be remiss not to talk about how in the States over the last few days the Supreme Court had their decision, and so this person wrote in a question that said
the Supreme Court had a decision to do what?
So I'll read the question. So this person said, it's finally happened. Gay marriage has been legalized in all 50 states in America as of Thursday. The person said, I think. Was it Thursday?
I can't remember.
I forget the day.
It's one of the days last week. So
yeah, they hinted at it, but what's the official thing that came down this past week with the Supreme Court?
So the case, I don't know what the case was the Supreme Court was hearing, was called Obergefell versus I can't remember who else, but it will go down. It's like Roe v. Wade in the States. Mm-hmm. This will go down as the landmark decision. It was a 5-4 split ruling, as most of these decisions are. And the judges on the Supreme Court, the majority said that gay marriage is protected under, I think, the 14th Amendment of the United States, which is the Equal Protection Act, isn't it? Anyway.
Yeah, to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right. So
the phrase is in the 14th Amendment.
Right. And so they came to that conclusion. What was interesting is if you read the decision that they made, which you can go online, you can read the decision and the dissenting opinions. If you read the decision, it reads more like sermon than it does legal decision, which is part of what happened here. The justices decided that they would go with a cultural wind and agree with this, which of course Canada, BC's had since 2003, so it's not a big deal. What's been interesting for us, my family and me, to look at that as an American living, I'm an expatriate living in Canada, and a pastor in Canada, is how fearful some Americans are. I even had a meeting with a friend on Friday, how fearful some Americans are about the world and how it's going to break up because of this. And I fully admit that the United States, one of the big differences between the United States and Canada, and I'll be interested to hear around the table, because I've got the 3 guys who are expatriates here and 2 Canadians, full Canadians. in Canada, there is this feeling of there's an embracing of multiculturalism.
Yeah.
So here in Canada, the idea, that's why you have French on everything, is because the idea is, you know what, we're not going to force anybody to hold the particular viewpoint that we hold together as a nation. We might all think that writing French on stuff is silly. But you know what? To embrace the few and to make them feel welcome, we will put French on everything. Whatever. You see that in the way that the Service Canada handles some of the Punjabi families in our area, which for the most part is really with kindness and extends an extra hand. In the United States, there is a value in assimilation.
Called melting pot.
Right. It's the melting pot versus the tossed salad, right? The idea is, no, there is such a thing to be an American. You're an American. And you might be from China, and you might be from Mexico, and you might be from Qatar, but I'm telling you that when you come here and you become a citizen, you're an American. And so it's far more important for you to agree on lots of stuff. Here, there's more cultural pressure for you to agree.
And I also think this is why the Christian community feels more of an impulse to fight as hard against it to save the identity of the nation, whereas in Canada there's less of that kind of dominionist mentality, because we're like, sorry, what culture, singular culture, are we trying to win over in Canada because of the mosaic nature of our nation? Right.
So in some ways, it's been interesting having conversations with some American friends of mine, as they've asked me, oh, what's it like in Canada? You've had this for, like 14 years or whatever, and I'm at 13 years, and I've been like, I don't know if you can use Canada as an example, because the truth be known, the Canadian government is pretty at peace with having dissenting voices and not feeling like they need to bring a sledgehammer and crush them. Seriously, you even look at what's happened with some of the polygamy case over in Alberta. Is it Alberta or BC? No, Bountiful.
BC.
Well, just even the
Bountiful, but just how slow it's been. It feels like it's taken a long time for them to, they just want to go the extra mile in these sorts of things, and even now they still feel a little bit uneasy about that. My point is that people of all different kinds of stripes and varieties can live at Canada, and yes, Christians in Canada people look down their nose at them for holding traditional viewpoints about gender or sexual mores. But in the States, there is almost a visceral reaction because there's a culture war going on, and in wars, you don't let the enemy go free.
But
you kill them.
As an American, here's the thing that concerns me from what I saw, and I'd be curious to hear your guys' opinion on this. It seems like it's even deeper than that, because it's this inherent distrust as well of the government itself. And particularly as an American, there's this idea that you hold the power at some level as an American, and that you're not under the tyranny of, those tyrannical leaders, if you will. Right. But now, to my knowledge, now I could be wrong here, but I don't think there was ever a state that voted in gay marriage.
Oh, they did.
There were some that were voted in?
Washington State did. Didn't they just recently? I thought they did. I think there were 30-some states that had already voted it in.
Well, it was legal, but I don't know if it was a vote of the people.
That's what I'm saying. Whenever it was a vote of the people...
Oh, I see what you mean.
I don't think it ever passed when it was a vote of the people. I know in Oregon, of all states you think it would have passed, I know for a fact it did not pass.
Well, California didn't. Prop 8 was passed on the other way.
And so here's my concern is everything, all the power in the U.S. that I'm seeing is being shifted to judges. And it's amazing to me that you can have 5 lawyers speak for a nation.
Well, and this has been the critique of one of the dissenting judges was, really, we want to have 5 lawyers who not only are they're completely unrepresentative of the country. They're all white. The ones that, or most of them, no, Sotomayor is not. But for the most part, they all come from Harvard or Yale graduate schools, law schools. They're all rich. They're all part of the liberal elite for the most part, and they're making the decision for the entire country. And this has been the feeling of the dissenting voices. Just let the states decide. See, in the U.S., you can do that. You can just say, you know what, federally, we're not going to make a decision about this. We're just going to let the states choose to do what they want or don't want. And there are states right now that are rejecting.
They're trying.
Well, Mississippi has said that they're not going to recognize what the federal government has said about this, which is, I mean, that's secession talk. So it's interesting where this is all going to fall out, because there are more conservative politically and people in southern states especially who are going to reject this. I mean, the vast majority of the people in those states are going to, when I say vast, I mean like we're talking 70%. Are we going to reject what the federal government says on these matters? And
I think a lot of people's fear too then though is, well, then this becomes the ultimate loophole. Because if you ever want to get something passed, well, you just need to take it back to the Constitution and this whole pursuit of happiness. I mean, it doesn't get much wider than that.
Right. So the critique in again, the dissenting opinions has been that they have established a precedent now that they'll be able to drive trucks through.
Yeah.
In the coming days, speaking about individualism earlier.
And you just need 5 people to approve it.
This basically 5 liberal judges.
Yeah.
Who
to me, so that's where I see a lot of fear in America right now.
Yeah.
Because I think that they feel like they have totally lost their nation.
Well, there's an article in the Atlantic Journal that came out I think yesterday or the day before, where even in the Atlantic, which is a decidedly politically liberally leading journal, said that the justices are acting like Congress, like the lawmakers. Like the Supreme Court justices are a lot more like Congress now. They make laws, which is not what they're supposed to do. So it's an interesting. There should be a real consolidation in power in the U.S. And this has happened over years. I mean, even George W. Bush, when he came to power, started going into wars that didn't require approval from the Congress. No. So, and by claiming, I mean, this is the way it's worked. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in the coming days. And the United States is perhaps, one of the 2 most important countries in the world right now, and I think China might be the second. But like the two they hold the most sway, most money, most sway, and it'll be just interesting to see what happens in the coming days about this issue. It
is interesting too. This is a worldwide issue. I mean, was it Turkey has been having protests on this? So it's
Ireland came to this viewpoint about a month ago, and their government passed it. What's interesting there though is it was put to a vote of the people.
Yeah, that's going back to Andy's point. That's when the people said this is the way we want.
Right? And I honestly think the American people would react differently if it had been voted in by the people. I don't think people would be as upset about it. Yeah, they'd be upset, but it wouldn't be the fear that I've been seeing and hearing, because at least the people would have spoke.
No.
And it is also interesting to see the effect that what happens in the States has on Canadian opinions. Like most of my friends that I know are not American expatriates, and this is like all they want to talk about on social media, on everything.
Oh, it's just going crazy on social media.
That's blowing up. And so the question actually that was written in was this person noticed that a bunch of their friends did change their Facebook profile picture to have the flag and the gay pride flag underneath.
Sure.
And posting all these congratulatory things about the vote and how this is so fantastic, which would spark these conversations. And my friend, not my friend, but the listener wrote in saying, I had friends who were just acting so uncharitably towards people over this issue, Christian people who were acting very poorly. And so this person's question was basically, how do we approach this issue as Christians with our friends who have a dissenting opinion on these matters in both truth and
So can I start
kindness.
By saying, as Christians, we need to start with our theology. And Jesus is on the throne. And history is being written and has been written by God Almighty. So to be on the wrong side of history is to be on his wrong side. God in his sovereignty has permitted this to take place at this time, probably for the chastening of the church and for the good of his people, ultimately. Listen, so what I'm saying is that we don't, as Christians, we don't worry about what governments do. This is not the first time in the history of the world where governments have made decisions that are hurt Christians. If you want to go somewhere where that happens, go to Yemen today. Go to the northern India, where the local governments are run by militant Hindus, and you might die for being a Christian. So I'm just saying that we don't freak out about it. Just because people look down their noses at Christians is not a big deal. But that leads me to my second point. The church has been in this weird situation for the last, 30 years, where it's almost like we've said to the culture at large around us, pleading with our hands, oh, love me. As if we say things the nicest way, if we just don't talk as much about sin, or we just, you massage the gospel in some ways that some people are actually going to like it. We use words like relevant to talk about that, and we want everyone to like. And the belief is, you'll like us. We're really nice people. We're really sweet. And our way of approaching, we call that love. We want to love you into the kingdom. The challenge that the Christian church faces now is that holding to biblical faithfulness on this issue is read by the wider culture as hate, not love. So people are in this sort of existential crisis for themselves, and the lines are being drawn.
What's this war of worldviews?
Oh, absolutely. And so as a result, again, I think as a Christian, I want to say to us, we should have expected this long ago. The culture's never been friendly to Christians, even when Christians were in charge of culture. I don't know how well it went. What it did is it proliferated a bunch of nominal believers, people who kind of, because it was cool. Yeah, church, cool, go to church, right? That's why the young adults who are somehow leaving the church are probably not, the young adults are not leaving at a greater rate these days. They just feel more honest to say they don't want to be there. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. In the 1970s, you had to go because you wouldn't get a job if you didn't go. Now, going to church costs you something, so they're out. So again, we shouldn't freak out about it. If you establish that we shouldn't freak out about it, then that should color some of the way we talk online to our friends about this, that we should recognize that Jesus is on his throne. We can charitably stand for what's good and right and say, I don't think, so somebody writes on their Facebook page that it's great. You don't need to engage it. And if you do, you can say, well, I don't know how great it is. I'm not sure I agree wholeheartedly that it's a good thing. I think that this is actually going to lead to some really bad places, as one of our emailers said before about the flag question, right? That this is going to end up somewhere questionable at best, dangerous at worst. And I'm saying that because when you break God's way for his world, the consequences aren't just God's active judgment. They sometimes are his passive judgment, in the sense that he's handing you over to those things.
Sin has consequences.
And you will you'll destroy yourself. And that's what's happened in a lot of the homosexual relations. That's what's really sad about it, is that a lot of the statistics having to do with the danger of this lifestyle have been buried in this debate. And as a result, we want to make it normal, but the problem is it's actually cutting the lifespan off of people, because of the kinds of disease and other things it brings in. So it's not a healthy thing. By the way, if you want to read a book about that, Making Gay Okay, by last name Riley, you can read all about that if you think that what I just said was decidedly hateful and should never be said in any public place.
Do you know what's interesting about that? Is that book follows the scientific method.
Yeah.
Which is like, what ultimately naturalism bows to. But yet there's inconsistency.
Right.
Is, although the scientific method would demonstrate that this is not actually a healthy lifestyle, that is...
Kyle, give advice to Christians.
Yeah, if you want to look at another resource and want to listen to something, D.A. Carson gave about a 20-minute kind of reflection on this a couple days ago on Desiring God's website. That's really insightful and brings up a lot of points that Jeff and Andy have talked about. And I think as we think about our response, interaction with the world as Christians, one phrase that has two different parts to it: against the world and for the world. That we want to be against the world in the sense that we are opposed to the world's self-destruction because of sin. But in our opposition to that, we're actually for the world because we want to show them the truth and the light and the love and the eternal hope we have in Christ. So that's going to cause us to get pats on the back by people who see us maybe first being for the world in a lot of our interactions, but our pats in the back from some people will be countered by black eyes from other people who only see us as being against the world, only see us as being against individualism and against rights, against people having the right to love who they want to love because love wins. Yeah. And I want to say, well, love wins, but God is love, and God shows his love by sending Christ to die for us in order that we might live with him. So that's the love that will really win.
Right. By the way, isn't social media a really bad place to have debates about stuff like this?
Yeah, it's an inherently problematic.
Like it seems to me you have to be very wise.
Yeah.
I thought recently in the last few days about the passage in Matthew 10 where Jesus tells his disciples he's going to send them out into the mission field as sheep among wolves. And so he says, so you need to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And I've thought that's what needs to happen with Christians. We need to be wiser than we are in the way that we understand the technology and the way that some of the social media and how we're going to be read by some people. It's not like you're sitting across a table at a coffee shop having a dialogue with someone and can be, people can see your facial expressions and understand when you're being sarcastic or whatever. So you need to be wise as serpents, and we do need to be harmless as doves. That people need to recognize that we are not going to bring the kingdom in by war or battle, whether they be culture wars or actual wars.
Or legislation.
What we are going to do is we're going to preach Christ and him crucified, and God will bring his people. He will. Even in the face of crazy things. There are lots of Rosario Butterfields out there. There are lots of people who are going to come to faith in Christ from these backgrounds. The church probably needs to get prepared to deal with a lot more of the fallout from sexual sin. People who come into the church in very messy situations. Yeah. And so we're going to have to be prepared to figure out how we can best preach Christ to them, but also disciple them in faithful ways.
Great. Can we get after one more question?
Oh, yeah.
This is totally off, not related. And Andy, I'm looking at you because you're probably going to have a little bit more background information. I don't know, all of you might know. Jeremy and I don't. This person says, hi there, guys. I found this article that claims that Jesus never existed. So what is the consensus academically about just the existence of a historical figure named Jesus of Nazareth?
Well, first of all, if you get my book, Thinking, read page 244, I believe it is.
No, did you just do that by memory?
I did, but I wrote it.
Have you memorized your book?
No. Certain portions.
Oh, Jeremy's got it.
I believe there's a quote there by an agnostic named Bart Ehrman.
244?
Wow.
There is no 244.
Try 140.
Were you trying for
144?
In your mind, is it a longer book?
Right? Footnote?
If it's 144, I'll be...
Whoa!
It was
Did
144.
Jesus even exist?
Boom.
There you go.
So I was 100 pages off.
Yeah. You were close. It's just one number.
Actually, let me see that. Let me read it. Because
This is great.
Because it was funny. If there's a great YouTube video out there in which Bart Ehrman is in. So he's an agnostic. He was a Christian. Went to a Christian seminary. He ended up leaving his faith because of suffering and evil. And he's being interviewed on this radio station, and this atheist wants to talk about Jesus as though he didn't exist. And Bart Ehrman will just have none of it. He just thinks it's the most ridiculous thing he's ever heard. And he just takes this guy to task. So you can see that on YouTube. It's actually quite amusing. But more than that, it inspired him to write a book called Did Jesus Exist? And ultimately, he would go on to... he writes this in the book. He says, there are several points on which virtually all scholars of antiquity agree. Jesus was a Jewish man known to be a preacher and teacher who was crucified, a Roman form of execution, in Jerusalem during the reign of Roman Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea. Even though this is the view of nearly every trained scholar on the planet, it is not the view of a group of writers who are usually labeled and often label themselves mythicists. I see, there you have it, right there. And he's absolutely right. Virtually all historians agree that Jesus did exist, and they do realize the implications of what happens if you say he didn't exist. And maybe one of you want to jump in here, but there's a big problem if you do that.
Well, look, there's more evidence that Jesus Christ exists than most ancient characters, right?
Exactly.
Nero and others. I mean, we have extra biblical.
Alexander the Great.
We have extra biblical accounts about these guys. You don't need to just have the scriptures. However, I'm not going to remove the scriptures as being historical documents. They are, and they were trusted. We can trust the documents of the New Testament more, I think, than we can trust most of the others around, because we have ones that are closer to the date when they were written. My big issue here is that the only way that you arrive at the conclusion that Jesus didn't exist is if you start with radical skepticism.
Yeah.
That if you say, nah, everything I've ever been told about Jesus is not true completely, and there's so few examples even historically that even existed. Like, nobody ever went there in the past, and those who've tried to, who are coming to it reasonably, like Ehrman, who's not a friend to Christianity these days, is like, oh, come on. Like, it's just a non-starter. But they start with a presupposition of radical skepticism and then marshal the evidence, which, of course, surprisingly, falls on their side, they say. If you don't start with that presupposition, you're not going to arrive at the conclusion.
And here's what Lee Strobel has to say.
About
We need more thinkers and writers like Andy Steiger.
I've been saying that for years.
His new book is a terrific example of how to engage people on the questions that really matter.
Didn't he put the same blurb on the back of, like, other books? He has a
It's actually a
standard one.
stamp, really.
We need more thinkers like
the name.
So at any rate, that issue is a non-issue.
Right.
Do you know, though,
the Village Atheist is the only person, honestly, you'll hear that from.
the advent of YouTube, though, the internet.
I heard
Anybody
a guy,
with a computer and an internet connection is now
An authority and
totally.
an expert.
Like that. There's a YouTube video called Zeitgeist where they have a really serious sounding young adult guy who talks a lot about how
The most
it's like
unhistorical
this. It's
information you've ever heard in your
it's
life is in that video.
ridiculous.
But if you say it with a voice like that,
But he sounds kind of cool and he doesn't show a lot of emotion, so it must be true.
By the way, I read Ehrman's book, "Did Jesus Exist?" and he takes to task Zeitgeist and others as being absolutely ridiculous, completely fallacious, and just actually made up.
fallacious.
There's the word of the day,
That's a good one.
Uh-huh.
More than
He
alacrity.
said it with alacrity.
but I can't spell it. So
It's a paradigmatic issue.
Well,
Kyle, you looked like you wanted to say something. You had your I want to say something face.
yeah. I mean, the existence of Jesus is obviously a huge question, and I remember hearing Larry King was asked a question. And he's a famous person who's interviewed lots and lots of people over the last couple of decades, and he would just thinking about people he'd love to interview in history, and said one of the guys, Jesus, of course, because he's so influential in history. And if you had one question to ask him, he said it would be this: were you really born of a virgin? And he said if that was true, then that would change everything about who Christ is, because if he's born of a virgin, then he's not fully, he's fully human because he's born as a baby, but there's something more to the story.
mm-hmm.
So that was what I was
You
thinking.
dated the Larry King
That's
reference dated you a bit, didn't it?
Well, that's just
Like Anderson Cooper would have been the right answer now, wouldn't it?
well, I don't know if Cooper was asked that question.
Did you see that program
So
on
if
VHS? in the
Anderson
80s?
Cooper had a ridiculous list, which he does, did Jesus exist would be on that.
Yeah.
There you
Thanks for rescuing me.
go. Does Larry King, is he still interviewing?
No, he's
No,
he's
but
gone.
he was around for a long time.
He
No,
was. Back
our-
in the 90s, he was around.
Our listenership, some of our listenership will be aware of Larry King.
Right.
Guys, thank you for your time and for your insights and your opinions. Kyle is Googling if Larry King is still on the air.
See if he's still alive while you're at it.
That's actually probably a
I
better
don't think Larry
question.
King ever existed.
All right. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please send them in to the extra podcast, extra@northview.org. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. And Jeremy, thanks for being here all year, man.
Attaboy.
Thanks for having me. It's
Yeah.
been great being in the presence of greatness.
That's right.
By that I mean
He's talking
Darcy.
about.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
you're not as hot as you used to be.
I know, right? All of a sudden it's Darcy.
Oh, your 15 minutes
Latest
is
flavor.
Your 15 minutes is over.
Enjoy them.
Tick tock. Tick